Hi, my name is Eliana Ann, but you can call me Ellie. I'm a chemistry major who loves to read, and this is my book channel. Welcome in, grab a seat. Before we get into anything else, I want to briefly acknowledge the video that caused this discourse to resurface. A TikTok posted by Maddie M. Clark reignited the conversation around anti-intellectualism in reading. I'll be inserting a very short clip here, not to center it, but to ground the discussion. The full video will be linked in the description. If you've spent any time on Booktok or in online book spaces, you've probably seen people arguing about anti-intellectualism in reading. You've also probably seen how fast those arguments fall apart. People get defensive, people feel insulted, and suddenly the argument becomes whether reading fun books makes you dumb. This is not what anti-intellectualism in reading means. Anti-intellectualism is not about intelligence. It's not about taste. It's about disengagement. It's about approaching reading in a way that never challenges you, that never asks you to think deeply. In this video, I want to slow the conversation down. I want to explain what people are actually trying to say. I want to talk about why this topic keeps getting misunderstood. And I want to show you how we can talk about reading in a way that leaves room for both joy and intellectual engagement. Because we can love books that are fun, and we can also recognize when we might be limiting ourselves. Before anything else, I need to be very clear about my stance. This video is not about shaming readers. It is not about policing what people read. I read for fun too. I'm not constantly reading books that are the most intellectually stimulating. But anti-intellectualism is not the same thing as reading for pleasure, okay? Any videos I reference are linked in the description. Any creators that are mentioned or tagged. And this video is not hate towards any author, creator, or reader. What this video is about, it's how we talk about reading. It's about how publishing and algorithms shape our expectations. And it's about whether we are unintentionally selling ourselves short as readers. And welcome to the first section, Section 1, what anti-intellectualism actually means. One of the biggest problems in this discourse is that people misunderstand the term itself. When people hear anti-intellectualism, they assume it means someone's dumb or that they aren't reading correctly. This is not true. Anti-intellectualism is about disengagement. It's a cultural tendency to avoid complexity, to avoid challenge, and to treat depth as unnecessary or even as if it was pretentious. You see it when readers skip political, religious, or social details because they don't matter. You see it when people dismiss themes simply because they aren't explained explicitly. You also see it in publishing and in algorithms. Books are promoted for being easy, fun, and instantly digestible. Over time, that trains readers to expect less, and this is important. Anti-intellectualism is not about individual readers being bad. It's about patterns. It's about how books are being marketed, discussed, and rewarded. Those patterns shape how we approach literature as a whole. If you want more context on how anti-intellectualism extends beyond books, I recommend the TikTok by Books with Amanda 212, which is linked below. And I also recommend It's Maggie Perkins for another clear definition if mine was unsatisfactory. Now we can finally move on to section 2, which is gender, race, and power in book spaces. This section is way more layered like an onion than section 1 was, just because there's so much to peel back and talk about to be able to properly discuss this. And that is my intention, to properly discuss every topic and not just the ones that I want to. I feel like sometimes when we are in book discourse, we overlook certain aspects, and that is not what I want to do. Okay, I want to talk about everything, and I just want it to be discussed properly with respect and with the proper intention. To understand why this conversation gets so heated, we have to talk about power, and specifically we have to talk about gender. There's this massive rise in women who read, especially women who read fantasy and romance. At the same time, there's been panic about the supposed decline of literature. The implication is that books written by women and read primarily by women are less serious, making them less valuable. This isn't a new idea, and it also isn't true. Women have always engaged with complex and meaningful literature. The issue isn't about who is reading, it's about how we define the value of what we're reading. When discussions of anti-intellectualism blame female readers, they miss the point. These communities are often deeply engaged when they're encouraged to be. Reducing intellectualism to be a gendered issue distorts the conversation. Anti-intellectualism is about engagement, not identity. The next topic in section 2 is systematic racism in publishing. There's another layer to this onion, of course, and it's one that often gets ignored. That layer is race. I feel that this can oftentimes be an uncomfortable topic, but publishing is not neutral. Visibility is not evenly distributed. Books written by white women are often celebrated for being fun and messy and light. When women of color write similar ones, their work is expected to justify itself. Their books are framed through trauma, through education, through moral importance, or they're ignored entirely. This isn't about individual readers being racist. It's about systems of marketing and visibility. It's about who is allowed to be just fun. Anti-intellectualism intersects with these systems. Algorithms reinforce what is familiar and easily consumable. That discourages readers from engaging with books that ask for more. I want to use this creator as an example. For this section, I want to talk about one specific situation. This is not hate towards the creator. This is an example of a larger pattern. This creator has a large platform, so I'm going to be talking about her. The example involves Sarah Hashim's Jessed Crown and a review by Mariana Moore. Disliking a book is completely valid. That's not what I'm trying to say. It very could well have been anyone's book. The book could have been by Leigh Bardugo and she would have disliked it. I just want to point out this situation. The issue is how criticism shifts when a book requires interpretation, okay? In this case, many critiques centered on confusion rather than engagement. The story wasn't spoon-fed. It required readers to infer meaning. So basically, she disliked Jessed Crown, and when I watched the video, a lot of her reasons were in the book. Like, you would understand why things were going on because it was said in the book. It just wasn't spoon-fed to you in the book, okay? A response video explains the implied world building and narrative choices, and I would like to say that I have read both books. On the screen, you can see a review for Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, which she gave 5 stars, and then her review to Jessed Crown by Sarah Hashim, which she gave 1 star, and I have read both books, and I will say that Fourth Wing does spoon feed you the world building and the narrative in the book, which is not something that the Jessed Crown does. The whole point is that you're figuring it out yourself, and some things are implied because that adds depth to a book. The author is trusting the reader not to need to be spoon-fed the story. But I have linked both videos, and it's really no hate to anyone who is involved in the situation. I just wanted to point out this critique, and you, of course, are allowed to make your own opinions with it. Before we move on to section 3, I just want to talk about this topic because I'm already dipping my toes into the deep end of the pool, and I fear that some of the booktube girlies have no backbone, so I will have a backbone and I will be the one to tell you that reading is inherently political. A common pushback to this conversation is the question of why reading has to be political, but the reality is that reading has always been political. The stories that are published, marketed, and remembered reflect those of whose voices are valued and whose are ignored. Pretending that reading is apolitical does not protect it, it flattens it. Refusing to engage with power, context, and critique is not neutrality, it is disengagement. That disengagement is exactly where anti-intellectualism shows up. Acknowledging these systems does not ruin reading, it deepens it. I recommend watching the TikTok by Lauren is Reading up on the screen. It'll be linked in my description. But I also wanted to expand this conversation because I saw a video. I'm not even going to mention the creator. I'm not even going to tag it because it was ridiculous, of a woman saying that she could not stand the subplot of politics in the Hunger Games and was just there for the romance. This was absolutely infuriating. So I also want to talk about a really clear example of how anti-intellectualism shows up in the way people read and that it is how the Hunger Games is often discussed, okay? Because it's infuriating. It actually is infuriating. A lot of readers reduce the Hunger Games to a love triangle or a dystopian romance. I do hate when people call The Hunger Games a dystopian romance, because that's not what it is. While romance is a part of the story, it is not the point of the story. The core of the Hunger Games is a political critique of state violence, spectacle, class inequality, and authoritarian control. The games themselves are not just a plot device, they are a commentary on how governments use violence and entertainment to maintain power. The capital does not just punish the districts, it turns their suffering into an entire spectacle. Katniss's role is not simply that of a romantic lead, but is a political symbol who is constantly being shaped, manipulated, and commodified by the state. When readers skip over that critique and only focus on who Katniss ends up with, that is not just a preference, it is an anti-intellectual way of engaging with the text. It is choosing to ignore the thematic core of the story in favor of the easiest, most emotionally digestible elements. And again, enjoying romance is not the problem. That's not what I'm saying. The problem is when romance becomes a way to avoid engaging with political and ethical questions the book is asking. Suzanne Collins did not write The Hunger Games to be a romance first. The romance exists to highlight how little control Katniss has over her own narrative and how even her relationships are weaponized by the state. Ignoring that context flattens the story and strips it of its intellectual and political depth. That's exactly why anti-intellectualism is so prevalent in reading, and this is what it looks like. It is not about what genre you read. It's about whether you are willing to engage with what the book is actually beneath the surface. And I really do excuse if that was like a big jumble mess. I just had bullet points. I didn't have a full script for that, but it's something that I just felt so strongly about talking about because it truly did offend me when I saw that video. I was like, oh my goodness, what? The Hunger Games is... No, The Hunger Games is it's a political book, babe. I'm so sorry to tell you that. But now we can move on to section 3, and I really do hope you enjoy section 3. And I'm so sorry. It wasn't a rant. I was being like so serious, and I did outline all of my points, and I made sure I put in the effort for that section. So I was not ranting, but I was just clearing some things up. So let's talk about the next section. Section 3 is a long and girthy one because we have a couple examples to talk about and just so much to discuss, but this section is how we read and what we value. One distinction that rarely gets made in this conversation is the difference between a good book and a literary work of art. A good book is engaging, it's enjoyable, it succeeds at what it sets out to do. A literary work of art asks more of the reader, it carries thematic weight, and it's intentional. These two things are not the same. They don't need to be either. Both are very valid, but anti-intellectualism appears when everything is treated as interchangeable. When we want everything to be special, nothing truly is. Okay, not every author can be Jane Austen. We are going to look at this through two sides of the same coin. On our good book side, we are going to have Fourth Wing, and then we're going to have another book on our literary work of art side. So let's calm our horses before we think that I'm like uplifting Fourth Wing to be the best book ever. Okay, Fourth Wing is a good book. It's engaging, it's fun, and it's easy to keep reading. The world building is thin in places, the thematic depth is limited, and that's okay. Not every book is going to be a masterpiece. The issue arises when readers only ever consume books like this. Compared to that, The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater is just amazing. Okay, it's my favorite series, so I'm a little bit biased, but I want to talk about how the series explores fate, death, class, family, and love with intention. Every character matters, every relationship carries weight, and even early plot choices are thematic. This is what people mean when they talk about asking more from literature, okay? I would recommend the video pictured right now. It's from Books with Ella with a K on TikTok, and it'll be linked. She goes more into depth because it's a recommendation for the books, so if you are interested in reading them, she talks way more about what they actually are about. But I just wanted to compare those two things so you can see the difference between a good book and a literary work of art. And I'm using the word good because I just want to be sure that I'm talking about things respectfully. While Fourth Wing is not the best book on the world, it is somebody's project and it is somebody's time and effort, and so I just want to be respectful when I talk about it. Next, we're going to talk about numbing reads, okay? This part of the conversation gets lost a lot as well. No one's saying that you should not be reading numbing or comforting books, because I read them too, of course. Reading for escape, relief, or enjoyment is valid and it's necessary at times. The issue is not that these books exist, but what happens when readers and publishers decide that this is all we want. When the industry is told that readers only want easy, repetitive, and emotionally numbing stories, this is what will be continued to produce. Anti-intellectualism shows up when comfort becomes the ceiling rather than an option. It is not anti-intellectual to enjoy a good book. It becomes anti-intellectual when readers are encouraged to never seek complexity, challenge, or depth at all. There's nothing wrong with loving a numbing read, okay? There is something limiting about believing that numbing reads are all literature has to offer, okay? I want to clarify that because that is what I'm trying to tell you, okay? It's fine to just want a good book, but you should also want to seek out a literary work of art. Now we're going to talk about false comparisons and misogyny. Another common argument in this conversation is that women are reading Rebecca Yarros instead of George R. R. Martin, but this comparison does not work, and it doesn't fail because of gender, but because those books are trying to do fundamentally different things. Fourth Wing is not attempting the same scope of world building or political complexity as A Song of Ice and Fire. Framing this as women choosing the wrong books turns into a structural issue, and it just turns that into a gendered blame game. This is where misogyny enters the conversation again. Women-centered reading spaces are dismissed as unserious because they prioritize accessibility and emotion. Anti-intellectualism is misused here as a weapon against women rather than a critique of how books are framed and compared. If we want a fair conversation, we need fair comparisons. Putting Game of Thrones next to Babel or the Poppy War creates a more honest discussion about depth and intention. The problem is not women's fantasy. The problem is using unequal comparisons and then blaming women for the result. Okay, so that's something that I just really wanted to clarify, because every book that a woman writes is not going to be bad, okay? Like, let's be realistic and let's give a proper way to discuss the books that are being written and the books that are being read. Let's be reasonable people, okay? Next, we need to talk about how you read. And we just need to talk about how people read, okay? Not just what they read. If you open a fantasy book and you skip the map because it doesn't matter, that is a choice. If characters reference places, history, or politics, and you choose not to engage with them, that is a choice. If themes, mythology, or social critique are present but not explicitly explained and you ignore them, that is a choice. Those choices are allowed, but they are also examples of anti-intellectual reading. Anti-intellectualism is not about lacking intelligence. It is about refusing engagement. You can turn almost any book into a more intellectually engaging experience if you want to. When I read A Song of Ice and Fire, I did not just read it once. I tracked the maps, I connected the religions, and I paid attention to how power operated in the book. The book demanded more, and I met it there as a reader. But of course, you don't need a complex book like that to do it. You can do that with any book. You can do that with Kingdom of the Wicked. You can do that with Magnolia Parks. You can even do that with books that are messy, imperfect, or romance heavy. Anti-intellectualism in reading is not just about the books you pick up. It is about whether you are willing to ask more from the story and from yourself as a reader. Good ways to give more to the story is, I like book journaling, because when you reflect on what you read, you have to recall the story, you have to recall the events, what you liked, what you didn't like. Reflection is a good way to be intellectual. It's intellectually stimulating because you're thinking, okay? I also recommend, I really like these book recaps, and I'm not saying you have to go out of your way to film a 2-hour book recap for a book you read, but it's a good example how being creative after you read books can be intellectual. I recommend Gracie Talks About Things on YouTube, and I also recommend Carrie Can Read on YouTube. They have some really good book reviews, and they are just very they are very intellectually stimulating, and I would highly recommend them. So I really hope you have enjoyed everything that I've had to say, because I enjoyed like doing this. This is really fun, and like this is very intellectually stimulating because we're talking about it, we're reflecting, we're asking more of the conversation, and that's all I'm asking you to do as well. I feel like this is a great place to end, and so to wrap up the video, I just want to clarify that reading is meant to be fun. It's meant to be an escape, but it can also be challenging, meaningful, and transformative. Anti-intellectualism in reading isn't about judgment. It's about possibility. You don't have to stop reading what you love. You also don't have to stop asking more from the stories. But this whole entire idea for this video essay started from a essay that I had to write for a philosophy class, and I was like, whoa, I'm getting really into this. I have so much to say. Let me write a Substack article. And so I wrote that, okay? And it was heavily based off of the essay that I had previously written, so it didn't take me too long. But I could give such a more biased opinion, and just I could talk about myself in that because it's an article, it's not an academic essay. And I had so much fun writing. I'd never wrote a Substack article before in my life. I'd written a few chemistry articles for different chemistry labs that I had done, but I'd never written just an article about whatever I wanted. And so it was a time. I do think the Substack article might be better than this video essay, but I also had a lot of fun putting this video essay together. Gathering all the different talking points from TikTok was a whirlwind. Yeah, it was so much fun. Okay. My socials are in the description. They're also on the screen. I have Patreon, of course you're on this YouTube channel, and then I have Goodreads, which I'm semi-active on Goodreads. I mean, I review arcs on Goodreads, so I'm quite active on Goodreads, but like any like personal books from me, like that I like personally read and I didn't read to review, you're probably not gonna see those. So but they'll be on Fable, so if you want to like if you want to follow me on Fable, that's fine. I had so much fun with this. Again, I'm not attacking anybody, I'm just attacking certain ideas, and that's okay because we are grown adults and we can talk about different ideas and different opinions that we have. And so I really hope nobody's offended because I had a time, and I hope you did too. I will catch you in another one, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.